Lydia Merrin claimed the unthinkable, and Mr. Adrian Kellan's life was shattered in a single afternoon. One student's lie would ignite a storm that no one in Wexford Hills saw coming. The small English town of Wexford Hills rested between wide fields, quiet parks, and streets where everyone seemed to know each other's routines. Life moved gently there. Shops opened at the same time every morning, neighbors exchanged polite nods, and the loudest sound most evenings came from the church bell striking the hour. The community took comfort in the predictability of their surroundings, believing that nothing truly dark could grow in a place so peaceful. Schools were trusted institutions, and Alderbrook Secondary stood proudly at the center of that trust. Parents felt safe sending their children there, convinced it offered guidance, discipline, and stability. Mr. Adrian Kellan fit seamlessly into this environment. He lived alone in a modest brick house not far from the school, cycling to work even in winter. His classroom, room 14, was known for its organized shelves, neatly pinned history maps, and the calm atmosphere he maintained without effort. Students often described him as strict but fair, someone who cared more about effort than perfection. He stayed late most evenings, grading assignments and preparing next week's lessons. To many teachers, he seemed like the dependable colleague who would never cause conflict or controversy. Because Alderbrook valued reputation, staff members were careful to follow rules and avoid misunderstandings. This was especially true after a few high-profile school scandals in nearby towns had appeared in national headlines. However, nothing like that had ever touched Wexford Hills. People believed their town was different, protected by a sense of tradition and shared values. That belief made the events that would soon unfold feel even more shocking. No one suspected that beneath the polished quietness of daily life, a storm had already begun forming. For Mr. Kellan, the start of the new school year seemed like any other. He carried out his lessons with precision, encouraged students struggling with difficult topics, and maintained detailed records as required by school policy. He paid close attention to academic performance, especially among students preparing for major exams. His workload was heavy, but he handled it with quiet dedication. Few people noticed the extra support he offered to pupils who needed help. He rarely mentioned it. He preferred to let his work speak for itself. Outside the classroom, the town prepared for its annual harvest festival. Banners appeared in shop windows, children rehearsed for parades, and local councilors planned the weekend schedule. Everything felt predictable and safe. Parents gathered at the school gate each afternoon, chatting about homework, weekend trips, and upcoming events. It was in these ordinary moments that the seeds of future suspicion would later seem unimaginable. The calmness of Wexford Hills made what happened next feel like a rupture, as though the town's trust had been shattered from the inside. People would look back on ordinary days' early morning commutes, school corridors filled with chatter, and the quiet orderliness of room 14 with a sense of disbelief. They would wonder how such a devastating accusation could arise in a place so seemingly untouched by conflict. No one realized that the quiet town, with its slow rhythms and gentle routines, was about to face one of its darkest tests. Lydia Merrin entered Alderbrook Secondary that year, carrying more worries than most students her age. On the surface, she appeared quiet, polite, and unremarkable, the sort of student teachers barely noticed in the busy rush of school life. But underneath her calm expression was a constant pressure that had been growing for months. Her family expected high grades, consistent achievements, and a future that reflected well on their name. Every report card, family gathering, and school event served as a reminder of how closely she was compared to her cousins, all of whom had excelled effortlessly. Lydia felt she could never reach the standards set for her, no matter how hard she tried. From the first term, her grades dipped sharply. She struggled with subjects that required structure and analysis, particularly history, where exams demanded long essays and precise arguments. She often froze when writing, unable to organize her thoughts. Instead of asking for help, she hid her difficulties, fearing her family would see it as weakness. She spent evenings pretending to study while scrolling through her phone, scrolling through revision guides she didn't understand, or sitting quietly at her desk with a blank notebook. Her parents assumed she was doing well. They expected nothing less. As the school year moved forward, Lydia's stress grew heavier. She received her first failing mark in November, which led to an argument at home she refused to speak about afterward. From then on, her attitude toward school changed. She stopped participating in class, turned assignments in late, and avoided teachers whenever possible. Mr. Adrian Kellan, who noticed patterns quickly, began to track her performance more closely. He recorded her absences, her incomplete tasks, and her declining engagement. He tried to support her in subtle ways, but Lydia remained distant. She feared any attention from a teacher might reveal how badly she was struggling. Her friends began to notice her withdrawal. She avoided group work, sat alone during break, and often appeared tired. The pressure of exams hung over her like a permanent shadow. She watched classmates revise confidently, discussing practice tests she hadn't even attempted. Her anxiety increased each time she imagined her family's reaction to her results. She created excuses in her mind: illness, unfair marking, personal problems, but none seemed convincing enough. She needed something powerful, something that would shift the blame entirely away from her. By January, the idea had begun to form quietly in her thoughts. She never admitted it, even to herself at first. It was a whisper of possibility, something she pushed aside whenever it surfaced. But as exam season approached, the whisper grew louder. She remembered incidents she had heard about students claiming mistreatment, schools delaying assessments during investigations, teachers placed on leave. She wondered if something similar could happen at Alderbrook. If a disruption occurred, maybe her failing grades wouldn't matter. Maybe her family would feel sympathy instead of disappointment. She did not see the danger in her thoughts. She only saw escape. Her desperation deepened in February when she failed another major assignment. Her parents' reaction left her shaken for days. That night, alone in her room, the idea that had once been vague took on a clearer shape. It no longer felt like an impossible scenario. It felt like a plan forming, one step at a time. She convinced herself it was temporary, that no real harm would come from it, that the school would simply postpone exams and everything would settle quietly. In her mind, she believed she was solving a problem. She never considered the cost or the person her decision would destroy. Lydia's plan took shape slowly at first, guided more by fear than intention. She convinced herself she needed a way to relieve the pressure building around her. Every time she entered room 14, the weight increased. She associated the subject she struggled with most, history, with the teacher who taught it. To her panicked mind, removing that pressure meant removing what she believed was the source. She began observing Mr. Adrian Kellan closely, not to learn from him, but to find small details she could twist into something else. His quiet, disciplined manner, once unremarkable to her, became material she could reshape for her own benefit. The idea of filing a complaint terrified her, yet she found herself thinking about it more often than she expected. She noticed how the school handled sensitive issues carefully, following strict procedures that always placed the students' well-being first. She remembered a previous incident involving another teacher at a different school, a situation that lingered in her memory, even though she had never known the full details. She believed that if she positioned herself as a vulnerable student, the school would act swiftly, perhaps even suspending exams until everything was resolved. She imagined the relief she would feel if the academic clock stopped ticking. One rainy afternoon, after receiving yet another warning about her incomplete coursework, Lydia made a decision she could no longer take back. She walked to the school's pastoral office and filled out a formal complaint form. Her hands shook as she wrote, but she kept going, driven by a combination of panic, shame, and the desperate need to escape the expectations crushing her. She described inappropriate behavior that had never happened, claiming that Mr. Kellan had attempted to influence her grades through improper means. She provided enough detail to sound convincing, but not enough to raise immediate suspicion. When she submitted the document, the atmosphere around her changed instantly. Staff members reacted with concern, ushering her into a quiet room while senior administrators reviewed her statement. Lydia felt a brief sense of victory mixed with an unsettling guilt she tried to push away. She reminded herself that the investigation would stay private, that everything would resolve quickly, and that she would finally have the time she needed to catch up academically. She never imagined how rapidly the situation would escalate. The school wasted no time. Following protocol, they contacted the local authorities. By the end of the same day, Mr. Kellan had been removed from his classroom and instructed to leave the premises. The news spread through the corridors within hours. Students whispered in corners, teachers avoided eye contact, and the air in Alderbrook grew heavy. Lydia noticed people looking at her with sympathy, offering supportive smiles. Their kindness intensified her discomfort, yet she reminded herself that she had to continue the act. She walked home that evening with her chest tight and her thoughts racing. She had achieved exactly what she intended. The exams would be delayed, her family would be distracted, and the blame for her poor performance would shift away from her. But as she crossed the quiet streets of Wexford Hills, she began to sense that the situation had grown far beyond her control. The simple disruption she had hoped for was becoming something much larger, something she had never meant to create. What she did not realize was that her accusation had already set off a chain of events that would be nearly impossible to stop. The investigation into Lydia's complaint began immediately, carried forward with a seriousness that stunned both the school and the community. The moment the head teacher received the written allegations, strict protocols were triggered, leaving no room for hesitation or informal judgment. The school had seen stories in the national news cases where institutions failed to act quickly, and Alderbrook was determined not to make the same mistake. Within hours, officials gathered documents, reviewed policies, and notified the safeguarding team. The atmosphere shifted from ordinary routine to controlled tension. The police arrived the next morning to conduct initial interviews, and their presence alone caused a ripple through the corridors. Officers walked through the building, visiting offices, questioning staff, and requesting digital records. Parents noticed patrol cars near the school and began contacting each other in alarm, causing rumors to spread even before statements were taken. Teachers who had worked with Mr. Adrian Kellan struggled to process the information. Many felt confused, unable to reconcile the calm, meticulous colleague they knew with the serious allegations presented against him. Yet, professional guidelines prevented them from expressing doubt openly. They were instructed not to discuss the case, even among themselves. Mr. Kellan was interviewed in a small office away from the main building, accompanied by a representative from the teachers' union. He was shocked, unable to comprehend how such claims could exist. His record had been spotless for years, with no prior complaints. He had no choice but to comply fully, handing over his laptop, lesson plans, communication logs, and access to his emails. His home was checked later, and personal devices were taken for forensic analysis. Neighbors watched quietly from behind curtains as officers arrived, and word spread across Wexford Hills that something significant was unfolding. Social media amplified the situation quickly. Students posted vague statements about a teacher being removed, while adults speculated in local community groups. Without any confirmed details, assumptions filled the gaps. Some believed the allegations immediately, whispering that no student would invent something so serious. Others felt uneasy, suspecting the case was more complicated than it appeared. But speculation continued unchecked. In a small town where everyone knew each other, public opinion shifted with each passing hour. Meanwhile, Lydia was treated with care and sensitivity. She was taken to several confidential interviews, given counseling support, and offered flexibility in her schoolwork. Staff members ensured she wasn't overwhelmed, believing she needed protection. She received messages of sympathy, cards from classmates, and reassurance from teachers. The attention both comforted and unsettled her. She had wanted a temporary escape from her academic crisis, not a full-scale investigation that consumed the entire school. The pastoral team kept detailed notes, and investigators compared Lydia's statements with the evidence collected. They checked classroom schedules, student registers, and CCTV footage from halls and common areas. Every piece of technology connected to the school network was scanned for relevant data. The process was slow, methodical, and emotionally draining for everyone involved. Each new detail added another layer of pressure. As days turned into weeks, the case expanded far beyond the boundaries Lydia had imagined. It affected not only Mr. Kellan's reputation, but also the trust of the entire school community. Parents questioned the safety of their children, staff tiptoed around one another, and students watched anxiously as their once predictable world shifted into uncertainty. The investigation had begun as a routine procedure, but it soon became clear that the truth, whatever it was, would not remain hidden for long. As investigators continued their careful work, small cracks began to appear in the story Lydia had presented with such confidence. These inconsistencies did not emerge all at once. They surfaced slowly, almost quietly, like loose threads at the edge of a fabric that had been pulled too tightly. At first, none of the discrepancies seemed significant enough on their own. But as each detail was added to the larger picture, the foundation of her accusation began to weaken. The CCTV review was the first hint. Investigators examined footage from the corridors leading to room 14 over several months, expecting to see moments when Lydia might have interacted privately with Mr. Adrian Kellan. They found nothing unusual. In fact, the recordings showed that Lydia almost never stayed behind after class. She tended to pack her bag quickly, walk out with the rest of the group, and move straight toward the courtyard or library. The supposed private discussions she had mentioned in her statement did not appear anywhere on the tapes. The absence of these moments didn't prove anything by itself, but it created a subtle contradiction that investigators couldn't ignore. Next came the digital review. The school's IT technician, tasked with checking email records, noticed something odd about several messages Lydia had submitted as evidence. They didn't match the metadata of emails sent from the school's system. The timestamps were inconsistent with the usual server logs, and the formatting looked slightly different from the platform staff used. Out of routine caution, the technician examined them more closely. After tracing the origin, he discovered that the emails had been created using a secondary email account linked to Lydia's student profile. The realization was alarming. Someone had crafted messages designed to look as though they came from a teacher. When this information reached the investigation team, they approached the matter carefully. They did not accuse anyone. Instead, they requested additional digital records. They checked every email Mr. Kellan had sent during the time frame Lydia mentioned and compared them with the messages she had provided. The differences were obvious once placed side by side. Investigators also noticed that the supposed emails lacked the usual automated signature attached to all staff accounts. To an untrained eye, the forgery was convincing, but to technical experts, it was unmistakable. More inconsistencies surfaced in her written complaint. Lydia had claimed that several incidents occurred during specific lunchtime periods, yet the school's attendance tracking showed she was in the cafeteria with her friends on those days, scanned in and out using her student card. Other details didn't line up either. She described conversations near the side entrance of the building, but that area had been closed for months due to repairs. Investigators compared her claims with maintenance logs, supervision schedules, and room booking sheets. Each comparison revealed yet another mismatch. Teachers, though not permitted to discuss the case openly, exchanged uneasy glances as they learned small pieces of information through official updates. They had been told to remain neutral, but the emerging facts made neutrality difficult. Some began to wonder quietly whether an innocent man had been suspended based on a story that no longer held together. The tension across the school grew sharper as people sensed that something was shifting behind the scenes. Lydia herself began to behave differently. Staff members noticed she appeared restless, distracted, and more withdrawn than before. She avoided eye contact during lessons and frequently asked to leave class for fresh air. She seemed frightened, as though the very investigation she had triggered was beginning to corner her. The sympathy she once received now felt like a weight she could no longer carry. By the end of the month, the investigation team had compiled enough conflicting evidence to conclude that the case was not moving in the direction they originally expected. The truth, which had once been buried beneath layers of fear and deception, was slowly rising to the surface. The pressure surrounding Lydia gradually intensified as investigators drew closer to the truth. What had started as a desperate attempt to escape academic failure had grown into a complex web she could no longer navigate. Each passing day made the situation feel heavier. The school staff still treated her with care, unaware of the full picture, but Lydia sensed the shift in the atmosphere. She noticed the lingering looks, the quiet pauses when she entered a room, and the subtle change in tone during routine conversations. None of it was accusatory, yet it created a suffocating sense of anticipation. She struggled to maintain her composure as the evidence mounted. The forged emails, the mismatched CCTV footage, and the contradictions in her statement formed a tightening circle around her. Every new detail uncovered by investigators erased a little more of the fragile confidence she once had. She found herself repeatedly thinking about the day she filed the complaint, wishing she could reverse the choice she had made in a moment of panic. But the process had grown far beyond her control. There was no easy way out. Investigators approached Lydia with caution. They were trained to handle sensitive cases carefully, ensuring the well-being of the student remained the priority until the facts were fully established. When they arranged another interview with her, they focused on the timeline of events she had described. They asked gently probing questions about specific dates, locations, and details. Lydia tried her best to maintain the version of the story she had created, but her answers wavered. Her responses grew inconsistent, and the pauses between them became longer. She could feel the investigators noticing every stumble. The final turning point came when they confronted her with the technical analysis of the emails. They presented the metadata showing the messages were created from a device linked to her own account. They explained the discrepancies between the emails she submitted and the real emails stored on the school server. They also highlighted the surveillance footage, showing her movements on days she claimed to have stayed behind. They did not accuse her directly. Instead, they laid out the evidence calmly and allowed her to respond in her own time. Faced with facts she could no longer dispute, Lydia felt the ground shift beneath her. The fear she had tried to suppress erupted into full panic. After a long silence, she admitted the truth. She explained how the pressure of failing grades and family expectations had pushed her into a corner. She said she never intended for the investigation to become so extensive, nor for Mr. Adrian Kellan to face such severe consequences. She described how, in her desperation, she convinced herself that the lie would remain small and contained. Her confession brought immediate clarity to the case. The investigators documented her statement, and the school leadership was informed. Safeguarding procedures were followed carefully to ensure Lydia received appropriate support, but the focus shifted quickly to clearing Mr. Kellan's name. For the first time since the accusation began, a path toward resolution emerged. News of Lydia's confession reached the staff quietly at first, then spread rapidly. Some felt relief, while others felt anger over the damage done to an innocent teacher. The atmosphere at Alderbrook changed again, this time filled with a mixture of sympathy for Lydia's emotional struggle and concern for the deep harm caused by her actions. Meanwhile, Mr. Kellan was informed that he had been cleared of all allegations. The message came through official channels, but the impact on him was far more personal. He felt a combination of relief, exhaustion, and disbelief. Though the truth had finally surfaced, the emotional and professional consequences of the false accusation lingered heavily. The damage, in many ways, had already been done. The confession marked the end of the investigation, but it also left behind a series of questions, regrets, and strained relationships that would not be repaired easily. Even after Lydia's confession, the aftermath of the accusation continued to ripple through Wexford Hills. Mr. Adrian Kellan had been officially cleared of all wrongdoing, but the damage to his personal and professional life was far from undone. Teachers and students returned to their routines, but a quiet tension lingered. Some parents, unsure of what to believe, avoided conversations with him or kept their children at a distance. The gossip that had once circulated freely online and in the streets of the town didn't disappear overnight. It left an invisible mark, a shadow that followed him wherever he went. Mr. Kellan tried to resume his teaching, but each lesson felt heavier than before. Classroom management was no longer just about discipline or encouragement. He had to rebuild trust with students who had absorbed the uncertainty like a sponge. Every interaction felt scrutinized, every gesture potentially misunderstood. Even staff members who knew him well were cautious, unsure how others in the school community would react if they displayed open support. Years of reputation, carefully cultivated, seemed fragile under the weight of a single false accusation. Lydia faced a very different kind of reckoning. School administrators and local authorities had designed a plan to address her actions without causing long-term harm, emphasizing counseling and rehabilitation over punishment alone. She was placed under academic suspension for a year, during which she would receive psychological support to help her cope with the pressures that had led her to lie. While some students expressed anger toward her, others quietly sympathized, understanding the intense fear and stress she had experienced. The town's response to her was mixed, reflecting the complexity of the situation. The family dynamics surrounding Lydia became more strained. Her parents were confronted with their role in amplifying pressure that had seemed ordinary to them, but devastating to her. They grappled with guilt and frustration, and Lydia herself struggled with remorse for the consequences of her decisions. She had intended to protect herself from failure, yet her actions had created a ripple effect, hurting a teacher, fracturing trust in her school, and unsettling the community she had always considered safe. Community members reflected on the events with unease. Wexford Hills prided itself on its predictability, its order, and its strong social bonds, yet the case revealed how quickly appearances could be deceiving. People discussed how easily a single falsehood could destabilize an entire community. Local news outlets ran analyses of the case, emphasizing lessons about the importance of evidence, the dangers of assumption, and the heavy cost of false accusations. The town's quiet life had been disrupted, leaving behind a sense of vigilance that was new and uncomfortable. Despite the resolution, Mr. Kellan found that returning to normalcy was not immediate. He had to rebuild relationships with colleagues, re-establish confidence among parents, and restore his own sense of security. Each small success, students returning to class, colleagues offering quiet support, positive feedback from parents felt like a tentative step forward. The emotional scars of being falsely accused, however, lingered, reminding him that innocence, even when proven, does not erase the experience of accusation. The story of Lydia and Mr. Kellan became a cautionary tale within the town, a lasting reminder of the fragility of trust and reputation. It served as a lesson in human psychology, highlighting how fear, pressure, and desperation can lead to choices with unforeseen consequences. Even as life slowly returned to a semblance of normal, Wexford Hills carried with it the memory that the truth, while essential, cannot always immediately repair the damage wrought by lies. The community learned that some wounds take far longer to heal, and that justice, though eventually delivered, often arrives after irreversible harm has been done.